Hello, today I am so excited to welcome Robert and Kay Lee Fukui, founders of Married Entrepreneurs and authors of the book Tandem, The Married Entrepreneur's Guide for Greater Work-Life Balance. I listened to the book already and it's amazing. And they are dedicated to helping entrepreneurial couples build a thriving business and a strong marriage without sacrificing one for the other. So Robert is bringing with us years of corporate experience in marketing and sales. And Kaylee comes from a third-generation family business background. So together, they're going to offer a powerful, faith-driven approach to business, marriage, and balance. So if you're struggling with work-life balance, financial stress, or just the power struggle between your business and your marriage, this episode is for you. So Robert, Kaylee, thank you guys so much for being here and sharing your wisdoms. Anything else you'd like to add to the introduction to share who you are?
Now you hit all the pain points.
We are so glad and happy to be here today. So we're excited.
All the common pain points we all go through, I think.
Yes.
Hopefully it's not just us, right?
Yes. Honestly, I mean, from listening to the book, you guys touched on so many topics that I have just come up with, just talking to a lot of the women that I work with on a regular basis, little things here and there that you've touched. And it's so good to have one source finding that I can point them to that kind of addresses a lot of these issues. So this is great. And I appreciate you. I don't know if it's courage is the right word, but just having that, whatever it is, to realize that this is not just an issue between yourselves, between the two of you and your marriage and your business, but it impacts so many other people, and presenting it in a way that, I don't know, I guess it's just safe and welcoming and open.
Thanks.
So,
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if it was courage, but I think mainly because I think the way I think or approach and the way God does things is he just presents the issue. I'm very much like a problem solver. So if I just see something, I'm like, hey, that's not right. Let's fix this, right? And this issue really was from that. It was partly our own journey growing up in these entrepreneurial households. Actually, my dad was a pastor, but running a ministry at the church and running a business and growing that is pretty much the same thing. In principle, it's all the same issues. And so we had that experience, some of the pain growing up in that environment, and sometimes the family took a back seat for the sake of the ministry or the business. But then when we started consulting with family business, when I left my corporate job 9 years ago, one of the things I did see early on was that there's so much focus on building this business that the marriage and the family was suffering. As Kay would say, the business was the mistress in the relationship. And so it was just more kind of seeing a trend that like one business owner after another was facing the same thing that we kind of face even growing up. So then it was like, oh, we weren't the only ones. And I'm like, oh, this is a common issue. And then I'm looking around for resources that would help, and it was like, I don't really see anything out there that really addresses marriage and business at the same time. Because you can get marriage counseling or business coaching and consulting, but, these professionals can't always empathize with the other side of their life and what they're dealing with. And so the focus is really on one or the other. And so depending on how the couple approaches this problem of work-life balance and marriage and business is going to determine how well or not they do grow in these areas. And so we're already consulting with the business, helping them grow. And so it was like, okay, we can do this, but what is the real goal? Like the business isn't the issue, right? The main issue in your life, it's you want to build a healthy life. You want to build freedom. You want to be able to really be able to pour into your marriage and your business and your kids before they're old and out of the house, right? So how do we do this well? And so really that was the problem that was just facing us. And I just said to Kaylee, I was like, hey, there's an issue here that nobody's really addressing. So why don't we try? That's kind of how it started.
Well, and I think too a lot of times you see people that have these successful businesses and they get to the age, at least in my experience with my dad, and they can no longer work anymore.
yeah.
Or they don't have the physical health or whatever's going on, or they want to retire. And then they have nobody takes over the business because the kids, like myself, become so resentful. It's like, oh my gosh, I had to compete with you all my whole childhood. I don't want to take that over.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they end up going out of business. And two, the owner waits too long, where it's like it's past the point of passing it on to somebody else because they really need to retire.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I try to introduce, so I offer a course, I call it the Empower Her Business Accelerator. And I touch on, it's 12 weeks. I touch on many different parts of really geared towards a startup of a business and helping them get started in the right direction. And one of the things I do touch on is exit strategy, making sure that even from the beginning, they're thinking about what that end could look like and start making decisions today to get them closer to that and more prepared for when that happens. That way, yeah, they're not starting from scratch at the point where they say, I want to retire. For many people at that point, it's already too far. You built a system that's not sellable because it's all either based around you or you just never made the right decisions to profit the business in a way that's sellable.
No, absolutely.
So yeah.
Right on.
So let me see. One of the questions I know in the book you mentioned, just how solopreneurs, home-based businesses, that's how a lot of my customers are. And just the balance between work and life. Like, for instance, me working in my basement, like it's a very gray line between when I go through the door of my office, am I entering the house? Like I don't have much of a separation because I don't go to work, and how that can I can see the signs of, pulling it on my marriage. And, either you can, I see the potential that done right, it can bring us together or it can pull us apart. So what are some of the early signs that we should be looking for that can, help us know if we're doing it in the right way or not?
Well, first, I guess the solution is, how do you establish healthy boundaries between business life and in home, and especially like ours too, our office is at home. And so, sometimes you have to really literally close the door and maybe have a closed sign. I mean, right? Like a lot of business, brick and mortar business, it's open, close, and there's actually a sign. So you got to figure out what's going to work for you. What to make sure you transition to home and you don't come back in, because like dinner time, it's so easy to come back in the office and do things. And so part of it is, like for me, is I just leave the phone in the office. I don't take the phone out into the living area. And so, because you can shut the door to the office, but if the phone's with you
in your hand,
right, you're still going to respond to something. So you really have to block it off. And, we're kind of like, especially with phones, right? We're like Pavlov's dog. We respond to notifications. And so it could be a really non-important issue, but we're going to respond because we're so conditioned to respond, right? So you got to know your weak points. And so for me, I just keep the phone in the office, and then, just leave, close the door. So basically my transition moment is, once dinner's about to be ready, we take the dog for a walk, and then we come home and eat. So that transition moment for us is the dog walk. And then, so I know we're leaving business, and then when we get home, it's dinner time, and then boom, we're done. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it's also, we agree upon these things too, right? Because that's the other part is, don't try and do it on your own because you're married. You have your spouse to be an accountability partner. So here's what we agree to, so for our example, once I leave the office, we go for a dog walk, then we're done with business. And then,
because I can ask him, like, how was your day then? So that by the time dinner comes around, and, and he probably we'll talk about some work stuff, but by the time dinner comes around, I've already asked him. So I'm not saying, oh, how was your day? What did you do today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Actually use the dog walk. Yeah. To talk about business issues. But then we know that's the transition period. And now we know when we get home, it's personal time.
Okay.
And so yeah. And then again, we all slip too. And so again, that's why you need that accountability partner and that point of agreement, because if business start to come in the conversation during dinner, we can call a timeout and say, is this important? Can we wait till tomorrow or the next business day? Or like we have weekly meetings to talk about these things. Can I wait till then? If not, if it's an emergency, okay, we can talk about it. But 99.999% of the time, it's not an emergency issue. It's just something we just automatically talk about. So we can hold ourselves accountable to that because we've agreed upon that.
And as far as our clients, we kind of train them, like, these are the hours that we work. Like if we're going to be gone for, 2 or 3 days on a trip or something, we let them know ahead of time. Like, we're going to be gone. So if there's anything that you need, let me know so I can get that to you, because when we're gone, I don't want to be checking emails, because once I get started checking emails, it's all downhill. I can't stop, honey.
Yes. Yep.
And then I'm talking and thinking work. You know what I mean? So.
Yep. It triggers whatever their question is, triggered something, and you're like, oh, and you want to get it, you want to get it done and over with. You don't want it to linger. Yeah, been there, done that. I have my cell phone. Actually, it's my personal cell phone and my business phone in one. So basically, the phone is set up to be my personal phone, but I have my business phone through Verizon, and so there's a Verizon app. So the phone would ring through my cell phone, and I have that going to do not disturb after 5. So that way I could take my phone with me, and I know my work stuff is all going to go into straight to voicemail, or the text message. Well, I will see them tomorrow. So that way I'm good. But it's the email. The email, I don't have that one somehow to just turn off magically. And I'll still see those notifications come through. So I'm just like, yeah, I have to discipline myself with that one.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, I actually I turn off, I don't have any notification signals. I turn all those off. So that way, whether it's emails or texts, whatever, I check it on my time. Because again, it goes back to majority of this stuff is not urgent anyway. But we just tend to respond. So I just turn off all the notifications, period. And then even Saturdays, I do a basically social media electronic Sabbath. My Sabbath is my Sabbath. I actually, even electronics. And so don't respond to anything.
Okay.
Even personal stuff, because I'm with my wife. So unless we're doing something different, separate, and then I do check because in case she calls and texts, so I do respond to her.
That's
Thank you,
different.
honey.
You're welcome.
So now, and it sounds like though, like these boundaries that you've set are these boundaries that you have picked yourself and said, okay, this is what I want to, how I define my work day, my workspace. Or is this something you define together? Because I could have an idea of what work-life balance looks like to me, but my husband may not feel the same level of attention, appreciation. I may feel like I'm giving him enough, but of course, his version of enough is not the same. So how do we go about that conversation of establishing what that looks like so we don't start negatively impacting the other person, unintentionally, of course?
Yeah, it is something you have to get up, talk about together, because it is your life. You're two is one, right?
Yeah.
So we do have to determine that. You're going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we sit down and talk about that. Like, what's important to you? Let's get date night on the calendar before we get all the work stuff on there and all the soccer games and, all that stuff that adds up so quickly. We get down the priorities. So we put the date night now down so that's happening. We talk about this all in our weekly meetings. Like if Robert's going to be traveling for a week or two, I need to know what the expectations are. I don't like to be caught off guard, like, oh my gosh, you're going to be gone for a week. You didn't tell me. You know what I mean? As opposed to I can see it on the calendar. We talk about it, and then we plan something for when he gets back so that we can reconnect. And I'm sure you can do that with your kids as well, because, they all want different and need different things. So if you can set time aside or whatever they are needing to give them, then that eases their mind. Like, okay, well, I know mom's going to take me Saturday. We're going to go fishing or whatever it is. Then they know what the expectations are as well. And then the boundary, I'd say, for work is what is important to you. Like, do you work 8 to 5? And what's the boundary? Are you going to be checking emails all day long? Like Robert will check emails 3 times a day. What does that look like to you? Not so much busyness, but being productive and keeping track of that and having a boundary around that. I mean, a lot of times I'll put my phone in the bedroom and I tell everybody, if it's important, call me, because I can hear it ringing. But you'd be surprised how many times I look at my phone just to see if someone texts me. You know what I mean? It's not like 2 or 3 times a day either. It's quite a bit. And, it's a time waster for me and distraction.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I've actually had to, I knew the future was there, but I started to get more proactive with measuring how much screen time is being used. Now, there's different things so for instance, when I was listening to the book this weekend, I was using my phone, using headsets. So it doesn't track that as screen time. And I get that because I was up moving around, doing things, sweeping, doing dishes and stuff like that. So I wasn't actively just locked in my phone in my world. And so what I'm tracking is, okay, how much time is my phone in my hand and I'm actively looking at something? And I was surprised, now that I'm intentional about it, how much my time has gone down and how much more I'm aware of and engaged with my family.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted.
And that's a great example because, a lot of people, they say we're so busy and I don't have time to whatever connect, right? Whether it's a weekly date night or whatever. And when you really audit where you spend your time, like you find all these time wasters, right? I mean, the majority of our time, even for me, on the phone is not productive. And so if you say, okay, here's how much time we're on our screen in the course of a week. I mean, if I just cut that in half and put that to, connecting with my spouse or my kids and all that, that's significant.
Yeah.
And so the reality is, we are busy, but is it very productive time that we're doing? And so it's really, you have more time than you think to really invest in your relationships and in your business. You have more time than you think to really be able to spend enough quality time on both of those areas for them to prosper and to thrive. It's just about where are we putting our time?
Yeah. And now one thing I don't think we really touched on this, for our listeners, because I know you and I know the difference. I've listened to the book and we've talked before, but we're talking about couples and running businesses. So maybe we should define, I think these were your terms, couplepreneur and solopreneur. And so that way people may think, okay, well, my husband doesn't run the business with me, or he's not running his own business, so this doesn't apply to me. So I want to make sure people understand who should be listening to this conversation.
Yeah, it's basically any married business owner. So whether you work together or not, and we didn't coin the term solopreneur, couplepreneur, but solopreneurs are typically, usually you run the business by yourself, basically, and spouse isn't involved. So your spouse could be having their own business, or they have another career, or they could be a stay-at-home parent. And then the couplepreneur are the couples that do work together in the business, where that's at least part-time to full-time. And so those are the two distinctions. But as far as the overall need of both of those are usually pretty much the same. Number one, we want our relationship to thrive. And is the business overtaking that, right? And so, but we still want the business to thrive because obviously it's our income. So, it's just the challenge with a lot of people growing up in this age of, in this culture of where our success is measured by what we accomplish, the money that we make, the business success and all that. And very rarely do we see how people measure your success based on the healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so based on how we define success is where we're going to focus our attention. And so we got to take a step back and say, okay, we got married, so obviously you're supposed to be a priority. We have kids, so obviously they're a priority as well. Our business is also a priority because of that, but how do we do all this well so that the business is not just, being the mistress in the relationship? And so how do you do that? And there's different dynamics, whether when you work by yourself, and your spouse is involved versus when you're working together. But at the end of the day, we all kind of want the same thing. We want a thriving life. We want a fulfilling life, which is not just all about business. And so whether you're working together with your spouse or not is irrelevant. As you're married, you have a business and you want to lead and build a thriving life.
Well, it affects both of you, whether you both work in the business or not. It bleeds over. I mean, like you were saying, you work separately from your husband, but your husband built your whole office. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you need him. And that's a great skill to have.
Yeah.
Someone to be that handy. So,
Yeah.
you guys complement each other, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to make sure people knew that this conversation applied to them, because the majority of the people that I've worked with personally are female entrepreneurs and their husbands have a full-time job outside of the business. And I know a lot of resources I've heard before, even like calling like the business is the mistress, a lot of it is, traditionally geared towards the dynamic where the man is running a business and the wife is maybe a stay-at-home wife with the kids supporting. And so I feel like there's a different dynamic now with a lot of female entrepreneurs being the ones that are going through and starting the business, and the husbands need to be supportive of the wife in that role. And I feel like sometimes there's still some, let me see, how do I say this? properly. Maybe there's like, and not, of course, not all men, but there's some men who have the tendency to think, oh, okay, what's this? It's my wife's little hobby. And how like the level of professionalism or seriousness that they take is not the same as when a man starts a business and the woman supporting him. I don't know if I don't know if that's a question or not, or a statement, but that came across right.
No, that's totally fair, because you're right. Especially when the wife is probably taking care of the kids as well. So you're starting a business, but you can't quite put full-time effort because you have the kids to raise and have all the other domestic responsibilities. So all of a sudden now the wife is doing, managing three things, right? And so that's the conversation, right, where husband and wife need to come together and say, okay, I'm starting this business, I'm doing this business, but what is it for? Is it just for slush money? If that's the case, okay, then we can look at that as that. Or is this something you want to build to potentially be a significant source of not just income, but maybe part of our future investments or whatever? What's the purpose of this business? And to get on the same page. And yeah, it does go back on the husband to really need to be able to respect that. And hopefully you want the best for your wife because it benefits you, right? I mean, even if it's just for slush money, well, let's build this thing up so that we can take bigger vacations or buy the bigger home or get the kids to college or whatever the case may be. That income is being used for something. So the more successful she is, even if it is only just to do slush money, well, let's make it big. But how do we do it and all that? So I think sometimes we lose focus, and I'll just speak for the men. We lose focus of how important it is to really support your wife to be successful, whatever she wants to do, because ultimately it still benefits you.
Yeah. It's not a competition.
Right. And it's kind of weird that sometimes there's this conflict dynamic. I'm like, it does benefit you if she's successful. And it goes also the other way around. Right. So I think it's that going back to the two becomes one.
Yeah.
So if you want to do this, okay, how do we support this so that it's successful? We don't want her to fail. I hope. Right. And because obviously she fails, it hurts me too. And so let's come from a different angle where, okay, this is what I want to do. Why are we doing this? And how do we best support it? How is it going to affect home? Because let's just say, dinner or laundry might get done or whatever, because it's impacting this. But okay, how do we do this well so that our home's still doing well, we're doing well, our kids are doing well? But how do I make sure, because maybe when I get home, that there's something I can do so that she can be done earlier and then get some of these things done.
Yeah.
Well,
So what are some things I can do to pick up the slack on this?
and sorry, I agree. Communicate what you need, because a lot of times what we think you need is not what you need. Because I remember one time somebody was saying to their spouse, oh, you know what? I need more support. And then they're like, more support? I support you. Oh my gosh, I make you lunch. I do X, Y, and Z. I don't have any more to support you. But then when they were able to clarify what exactly they needed emotional support. Not so much of the doing, but the other spouse did not know that because it wasn't communicated. And when it was communicated, they're like, oh, I could totally do that. So they're like, it was causing a lot of conflict, but they didn't know what the other person needed specifically, and they were missing the mark. So,
and also to be fair, because there was a simple solution, but the problem was, as Kaylee was saying, he didn't know how to communicate what he needed. Yeah. And it was through just our questioning where we figured it out, and it really boiled down to a love language.
Yes.
And it was the words of affirmation, that encouragement is what he needed. He didn't know how to communicate that, because what he would say to his wife is, or said it in passing, was, I'm building this law firm and I feel like I'm alone. And so that triggered her. She's like, what do you mean alone? That's when, I do this, I pack your lunch, I deliver your lunch to you, to the office, I'm doing all these basic acts of service. And then when we drilled down to it, we found, no, what he's really looking for is words of affirmation. It's not that you don't do these things, but it's the thing he really needs is actually pretty simple. But it also goes to the communication piece is how to have these conversations without it blowing up. First she reacted. So that was the stumbling block in that communication, understand what he really needed, because she kind of reacted instead of understanding, what do you mean by alone? Right? Because that's what we ask. When you say you feel alone, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Right? But she made us quick assumptions and jumped to it, like a lot of husband and wives do. Sometimes we jump to a conclusion before drilling down and understanding really and asking some thoughtful questions and understanding. And then all of a sudden you find that, oh, that's what you need? And then she's like, oh, I can do that.
Simple.
Which she's a nurse educator in her day job. She's a nurse educator, and that's what she does, is give emotional support to her patients. And she's like, oh, I can do that. And so then all of a sudden, next thing you know, what was a conflict in the beginning was just some thoughtful conversations, just having a listening ear before reacting, just listen. And then we found, oh, okay, what you really need is emotional support. And that's actually very simple. So sometimes, as Kaylee was saying, what your spouse needs is a lot more simpler than what we think. React to that.
So that's good. So it's just, comes down to communication, being able to ask the right questions and also be able to have the courage and the confidence to give the clear answers of like, I know this is what support looks like for me. Here's what you're not doing, what I need.
Well, and I wanted to circle back around too for the ladies about, having the different hats. And when you get home, you're home and you're not in work mode. Because especially if you're like the real direct, the strong leadership, the go-getter, we're just going to win the day over, take charge, no prisoners. That's fine for your work and great. But then once you walk into home, you need to change the hat to the softer, to the wife, to the mom. Not you're still in that work mode and we're just going to, run everybody rugged. Because it's hard on a family if we don't show the softer side and the loving side. And
That's true. I need to work on that. Because I know a lot of mine is as soon as they get home, do your homework. Get off your phones. Do your homework. All right, now do your chores. Now go take a shower.
Yeah, so I think that's an example of needing that transition moment, right? Still staying in more of that directive mode and say, okay, how do we connect first? And then we move on. There's friends of ours. She's the CEO of the company. The husband is operations. And so I said, so, your role in business is a very similar, like when you come home, like the CEO hat. And she's like, oh no. It's like when I'm in the business, I'm the CEO, or I'm the boss, so to speak. She says, but when I'm home, I'm the princess.
Oh,
And then they kind of reverse the roles, basically.
perfect.
It's a great balance.
Yeah.
And so I think if it's
she's not being the drill sergeant like she is at work.
Yeah, all of a sudden the softer side. And then, I think for men, we like to feel in charge too sometimes, right? Because let's face it, we are pretty delicate. We like to have a sense of being in charge of something. And so
control. You need to have some control over some parts of your life.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's nice to not always have to be on. And so
Yeah. All right, awesome. And then you guys mentioned one thing earlier during our conversation that you also touched on the book that I would love to. I feel like it's going to be a good tip for a lot of people listening is the weekly meetings. So talk to me about what that weekly meeting is, what it looks like, and what people can try to accomplish during this time to really improve the communication in the relationship.
Sure, we'd love to share that with you. So we meet every Monday at 3:30, and we talk about a lot of times the same topics. We give each other an encouraging word, which that goes a long ways, because you know what? Sometimes we have a lot to be thankful for, and sometimes it's easy to not say that, what's on our heart. And so we say the encouraging word, we go over our finances, where are we at, so there's no surprises. Do we have clients coming down the pipeline? What do we see coming in the future? We go over our calendars, we sync it all up so we know what's coming up. Get the date night on there. If there's anything that we need to talk about that we weren't able to resolve during the week, we talk about those things then. And what else?
Yeah, so it's kind of broken down to kind of personal, and then we got our business stuff. And then within the business stuff, there's different things, projects, or podcasts, whatever. And then usually once a month, especially once a quarter, we're kind of more on the vision side. Our business meeting tends to take up a lot more visioning, how are we tracking with our goals, what's coming up, anything we need to shift or edit or pivot or whatever. And of course, once a year we have our big meeting. And so it's very business-like in a sense. And sometimes people kind of react to that. But I said, when else are you going to do it?
Yeah.
Like, when else are you going to sit down with one-on-one time and talk about these things?
And the reason why you're not on the same page is because you don't sit down and talk about these things.
Yeah.
And so if you don't schedule it, it doesn't happen. Then you're just two ships passing night and just throwing stuff at each other as you're talking, right? As you're going in the door, he's going out, and then you say, oh, don't forget to pick up the kids, those kind of things. And then why things fall through the cracks is because we're not just sitting down and intentionally just focusing on this. Because when you're throwing information out to your spouse and they're preoccupied with something else, eventually something's going to fall through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
And so the meetings time is a time we know it's dedicated. We sit down, we talk, phones are off, whatever, and we're just dedicated talking about these issues. And it's smoother because then we're not throwing stuff at each other during the week that doesn't need to be talked about because we already talked about on Monday. And it's not to say we don't talk about things during the week, but a lot of anything that can be reserved to the Monday meeting, we just put on the Google account, on the Google agenda. So that's a place to park stuff that's not urgent, but we need to be talked about.
Because sometimes I come in, I'm like, honey, I need to talk with you. And he's in the middle of doing all this content, which is taking heavy focus and thinking. And he's like, what? And I'm like, I need to talk with you. And he's like, no. And then I get triggered because I'm like, I get offended, as opposed to me saying, yeah, is this a good time? And he'll say like, no, this is not a good time. Can I wait till our meeting? And then I can just write myself a note on the Google Doc and talk about it. Then it saves us getting into an argument. He's able to get the work done that he needs to do, because if I interrupt him, it takes him a lot longer to get back on track, and then he's not happy with me.
Yeah. Or sometimes just later in the day. I mean, not to say everything gets thrown to the weekly meeting, because people are like, well, some things are semi-urgent, right?
Yeah.
So, a lot of those things too is I'm like, oh, I'll talk to you after lunch or whatever. Okay. Give me an hour. Let me wrap this up, and then I'll get in the other room. We'll talk. So, there's a lot of things. It's not everything gets dumped to the weekly meeting, but any of the bigger topics usually gets pushed to there. But any of the things that just need to be talked about because these are things that are happening during the day or the week, I just have to say, just instead of just pushing it off, I do tell her when is a good time we can talk about it, and even during that day, right? The thing is, what happens is when we kind of push things off, it never gets talked about it later, and that's when the spouse gets upset.
Yes, and I feel like that's why, Kaylee, when you mentioned, okay, I'm going to put it on the Google Doc right now. That way, when the time comes and you have the time to meet, you remember all the topics and you're able to bring them up. Because that's something that I feel like many people probably do. Like, oh, something comes up, other person's busy, and then you go on doing other things and you forget what it is that you wanted to talk about, and then things get dropped. And so I love that. I think this tip alone, I think, is going to help save a lot of people. Just frustration and headaches, just having this weekly check-in. And also, like, during the week, especially if you work, both of you work at home like I do, being able to understand the other person when they're in focus mode, and maybe that's not the best time. Wait until determine like, okay, there's going to be specific time blocks. Like, okay, this is where we can catch up, do what we need to do. That way you still have your workflow and you still have your conversations with your spouse and get things done. So I love it.
Yeah. And then the good thing about looking at the calendar too is like, you look it over and you're like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work out. So maybe boundaries, maybe we need to put a pause on this volunteer thing right now, because there's no way we can get all this stuff done with the kids and the family and the business. And so it's a good time to look at that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, this has been amazing. I feel like this has given a lot for people to think about, to start, applying to their relationships, applying to their marriage, and really looking at themselves, how they've been communicating, how they've been receiving the information from their spouses, and meeting each other's needs to make it work. So there's not a constant power struggle between the business and their marriage.
Yeah. And all this stuff applies even in your business, between you and your clients and all that. There's a client we had almost wanting to drop one of his biggest paying client because they're always calling for stuff, and they're becoming a pain and all that. And as he's talking, I was like, because there are different people in the business that are talking to him. It's not just the owner or the main manager. It's usually multiple people from the business. The client, the business is talking to him. So I said, you ever think about just setting up a regular standing weekly meeting or every other week meeting? He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, they call you whenever because you don't have a time to talk. So whenever something pops in their head, they're just going to call you. Because when else are they going to call you? Right? And so I said, if you set up a standard weekly meeting, then you always have an agenda for those things to get parked. And he's like, oh. So then a couple months later, we were talking. He's like, oh my gosh, that was great.
Because you know what the expectations are. And that person can write all of his questions down on a document and then think, oh my gosh, Monday at 3, I'm having my meeting. I can ask him all these things at one time.
Yes.
Plus, because some of these conversations, he probably had to talk to somebody else in the company. And so he's making multiple calls just off that one phone conversation. But when they're all together every week, then we can just troubleshoot right then.
Right there. Awesome. Awesome. Well, now, do you guys, I know we want to share the book, make sure people get the book. Anything else that you want to share about that for people to get into your circle, get to know you better, get to work with you?
Yeah, if you just go to marriedentrepreneur/empower her. So the name of your podcast. There's a nice little landing page there marriedentrepreneur.co. Did I leave out the co?
Yeah.
marriedentrepreneur.co. That's why I have Kaylee. She pointed that out.
Entrepreneur.show/empower her.
Yeah. And so there's actually a guide called The 5 Daily Habits for Thriving in Tandem. That's free, so you can download that. So you can get on a kind of how to get a regular habit of great conversations and making sure that you personally are whole as well as your relationship. And then, of course, there's a link there to get a copy of the book Tandem. And then, so that's
perfect. I'll make sure to put that link in the show notes. And I don't want to steer people in this direction because it's what I did, but I absolutely I'm really glad that I chose to do the audio version, because with the audio version, you get some behind the scenes chatter in between each chapter that I felt like had so much value to the book. So
that's
you can imagine that's not in the written copy.
Exactly. We wanted to make sure there was something special for the audiobook listeners.
Especially if you're creative like me and want to get a little off script.
Yes, those were good. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you taking the time to share words with us, to share some encouragement. And I look forward to just continuing to watch you guys grow, and part 2 of the book coming out.
Well, thank you. This has been fun.
Thank you for having us. This is a great conversation. It's fun.
Awesome. Thank you.